The following is a sponsored message from Interfaith Community Services. Voice of San Diego is a nonprofit, and a majority of our budget comes from listeners and readers like you. But we also depend on revenue from grants and advertisers to maintain independence and produce more of the hard-hitting journalism you expect from us. Interfaith Community Services is North San Diego County's largest provider of social services, with programs ranging from food, housing, employment, youth services, addiction recovery, and more. Interfaith serves over 17,000 of their neighbors in need each year. Headquartered in Escondido, their mission is to help people help themselves. And to do that, they need your support. Visit interfaithservices.org to learn more.
Thanks for joining us on the Voice of San Diego podcast in partnership with News Radio 600 Kogo. I am Scott Lewis, the editor-in-chief at Voice. I'm joined as ever by assistant editor Andrew Keats.
What's up?
And Sarah Libby is our managing editor. Hello.
Hello.
All right. Senate Bill 615, R.I.P.
Dead.
That happened quick. Things escalated quickly.
Yes, that's over. We're going to talk about that. We have Councilmember Chris Cate coming in on the second half of the show to talk about it. We're going to get into the homelessness issue in East Village and Sandag. Always Sandag. There's some fun discussion there.
Some stuff
going on. I also want to say something. Next week, Whistle Stop, Wednesday, March 20th, 5 to 7:30. It's 5:30 to 7:30, right? 7 to...
That's right.
It's going to be a live podcast, Whistle Stop. We have Hassan Akrada from Sandag, the executive director, coming, and Nicole Capretz from the Climate Action Campaign. They're both going to come on. I think, Hassan Akrada's got a lot of things going on, a lot of topics. He's saying a lot of things a lot of people, different types of people, agree with. We're going to do some games with the audience. We'll have a lot of fun. Whistle Stop is always fun those nights.
Do you remember White Men Can't Jump?
Yeah.
My favorite movie?
Yeah.
In it, Rosie Perez says that winning and losing is one organic globule from which each person extracts what they need.
Yeah.
Hassan Akrada talking is much like that.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
How long did you think about that?
It just came to me. I was just thinking about it.
Is that
Great.
a put down?
No. It's like he says a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and then everybody hears from it what they want.
It's a skill.
And everyone always feels like they are agreeing with him.
So
Which,
we will,
despite he's saying things that some people may disagree with, but he says it in a way that they feel like they agree.
you had this great moment in the politics report item that you did on this where Supervisor Jim Desmond says, I know you're really into this big plan for the Grand Central Station in San Diego. I would like you to consider the Santa Fe Depot. And he's like, well, yeah, we're into the Grand Central Station thing. And then Desmond's like, I'm not asking you. I'm a board member, and I would like you to do this.
Uh-huh.
And they're like, all right, okay, cool. We have Desmond coming into the show a couple weeks from now, too, to talk about some of this stuff. So it's going to be a fun night with Hassan Akrada, right?
Yes.
All right. First up, though, let's do this. State Senator Ben Hueso and City Attorney of the City of San Diego, Mara Elliott, dropped their proposed changes to the California Records Act. The bill attracted outrage across the state. Monday, the San Diego City Council voted unanimously to oppose it. Both Elliott and Hueso said that they wanted to make public records easier. That's the whole thing behind this. All they wanted.
Hard to imagine that would generate such opposition.
All they
Just
wanted.
such an earnest attempt to make public records more accessible.
She said that when she brings it back, they're going to listen to people, and they may consider this time actually trying to include provisions that would make public records easier.
That would be great.
That would be cool.
Okay.
All right, so we wanted to pull some of the top moments from Monday's meeting. Now, you watched this, right?
I did. Yep.
So it didn't go well for the city attorney's idea there.
It did not go well for the city attorney's idea. So first worth noting, the city council wasn't even there to talk about SB 615. They were there to talk about their legislative priorities in Sacramento and D.C. for the next year.
Yeah, so the city, like any major entity that interacts with the state, they have a bunch of things they care about. They hire lobbyists. They want to get certain laws passed, others stopped. And so they decide every year what those are.
Right. And so after they had basically a fully baked proposal that had already been approved by committees and that sort of thing, then they came in and said, also, we probably need to make it clear that we don't support this very terrible bill that would make it much harder to get public records.
And that was led by a bipartisan couple. That was Vivian Moreno, the San Diego City Councilwoman, and Chris Cate, who's coming in later to talk about that and other things.
Yep.
And they didn't hold back.
They did not hold back. Well, they not only said that they didn't like the bill and that they were very concerned by it. Councilwoman Monica Montgomery, a lawyer, I should note, I think specifically made Sarah Libby here proud by pointing to the one thing that you always had such an issue with.
Yeah, which is that they really only singled out this whole meet and confer process that the bill would institute. And that's what they focused on in all their public defenses of the bill. And while I think there are issues with that provision, that's not like what would kill the Public Records Act, which is making it much harder to sue and making it much harder to collect attorney's fees. And so I think it was really notable that they were always focusing on this thing where if you heard it, it sounded like, oh, that's not so bad. You should meet to talk about these before you sue someone, which everyone already does.
Right. All right, let's listen to some of those hottest takes from the day.
Today, as was mentioned, Councilmember Cate and I released a memorandum opposing SB 615, which would make it harder for members of the public to compel an agency to provide public documents after being denied. Now,
and I'm disappointed that the City Council was not consulted on this proposed legislation, although I understand we legally don't have to be. I think it would have been important, and I'm disappointed that the city attorney herself.
Priorities. Obviously, the city attorney can do whatever he or she wants to do on any given issue, but I could see how, given the volume of legislation moving through Sacramento, something like 2,000 bills a year being introduced, that if you saw that the San Diego city attorney was sponsoring a bill, you would just maybe assume that the whole city was behind it. And in this case, none of us even knew about it. I mean, we just read about it in the paper.
They didn't know about it until Voice of San Diego got on the case.
Right.
Okay, so this particular last thing that they talked about whether the city attorney, why she didn't consult with them is really interesting, in particular for Mara Elliott, because out of the people who ran for city attorney in 2016, she was the one who most distinguished herself as wanting to clarify once and for all that she worked for the city council and the mayor as the general counsel of the corporation that is known as the City of San Diego.
Harshly juxtaposing herself against former city attorney Mike Aguirre.
Yeah.
Who often pitted himself as a foil to the city attorney or mayor's office, or the city council or mayor's office.
Yeah, she held up the county council as a good model, which I don't think any of us could really name who the county council is, and that's how she purported to want it.
His name's Montgomery.
Well, there you go. Good job.
We'll check that.
Yeah.
I sat down with Elliott in 2015 when she was a candidate for this office, and I asked her specifically about that, just so we can drive this home.
Your interpretation of the city attorney's role is that it represents what?
They're the top legal, that position is the top legal advisor to the city, and the city is the mayor and the city council. And when we serve as a prosecutor, we serve the people. So that's the distinction. And I think Aguirre brought in this perception that he was the voice of the people. He was the lawyer for the people. But our client, the council and the mayor, represents the people. They've been elected by their constituents to be the voice. So that is the concept of who the client is.
So indisputable, the client for the city attorney's office is the mayor and the staff of this and the city council of the city. And if they want to do something, your job is to advise them whether it's legal or to help them carry it out.
Both.
Okay, so here's what happens.
Yeah.
And it happened to her predecessor, Jan Goldsmith, too. They both run on Aguirre was the worst. He was a bad guy, ruined everything. The city was running really well. He came in. He was crazy. It shouldn't have happened that way.
Lasting legacy for old Mike and
Right,
Gary.
right.
We're just running on, coming up on 16 years since he was in office. People still running against him.
But this is the other legacy of him.
Yeah.
Which is that they all get in there and they're like, this is fun.
Yeah.
I get to do a lot of stuff.
So, like, I'm the boss.
I'm in charge of this whole big department. Nobody's my boss.
Right.
And I can say and do things on my own, and I like it.
And when there's something I don't like, I could change it.
Exactly. And I can go out and I can do my own legislation.
Mm-hmm.
I can set my own. I can ask for my own budget. I can do. The city council does have their own budget, or does set the budget. But again, they're not responding to the mayor. They're not in charge. Nobody's in charge of them.
It's one thing to run and be like, I'd like to just blend in and have nobody really notice me. I think that's the way. I just want to be a quiet municipal attorney.
Yeah.
And it's another thing to actually get there and realize that you're in charge.
And from the very beginning, right? She has been like really. Standing out, trying to take stands on major lawsuits, and really define herself and her role as responding to the community, not to the city council and the mayor.
Yeah, federal issues too.
Right. And as she is doing with a bunch of issues. So major change this week. They both, of course, Hueso and Mara Elliott planned or promised to bring this issue back. And I think that if they do, the advice I'd give to everybody out there is like, look, you can't just take away the only enforcement mechanism we had for the Public Records Act request, which was that if they don't comply, we get to sue them, and if we were right, they have to pay the attorney's fees. That's all we have. So don't take that away without coming up with something else.
Yeah, I'm so dumb that I would have thought a month ago, if you had asked me, that if any change was going to be proposed to the Records Act, it would be to give us a better ability to enforce it.
Yeah, you're
not
dumb.
to take away the one bit of enforcement that we do have.
Yeah, there absolutely have been attempts in the legislature in the last several years to give it more teeth, so that you don't have to go to court to get records, and that there are, fines and things like that agencies encounter that gives them incentive to comply with the law. And I just don't know that if she is coming at it from a perspective of I want to protect the city from these lawsuits, that she's ever going to be in a position where she says, well, let's make it easier to get records. It seems like she's just coming at it from a place where that's not necessarily her agenda.
Right. Well, okay. Well, we are going to have Chris Cate come on to talk about this and other issues, so stick around for the second half of the show. Okay, more in News of the Week. It has been more than a year since an outbreak of hepatitis A among homeless residents provoked City Hall and county government to make unprecedented moves to clean things up and to help people who were on the streets in East Village. Some areas are actually better now. Some of the tents that dotted the landscape are gone. Homeless counts are down, according to some estimates, but residents and police in other areas say things are actually much worse. It's the homelessness has an edge it didn't have in these areas before, and that crime and drug use is thriving. The mayor's office is kind of left in this weird position of championing how much better things are since they really got urgency around this topic, but then also making the case they need like $2 million in overtime because of how bad overtime for police because of how bad things have gotten.
Yeah. Yeah, so I went down to East Village with Lisa Halverstadt to help her do some reporting on this for the story. And there's a really prevalent sentiment from people who are living on the streets that things have changed an awful lot for specifically their interactions with law enforcement. They're much more likely to be pushed out. They recognize that if you put a tent up, it's going to be taken. You're going to be pushed out. That's sort of conventional wisdom at this point. But also, many people told us that drug use is getting more rampant, that the level of criminality and aggressiveness among the people who are still there is greater than it was 2 years ago. I think one theory for why that might be is just that it's just a concentration issue. If you have 1,000 people and you start pushing people out, the ones who are left are the people who are going to be of a certain type, and in this case, I think it seems to be people who are more likely to be struggling with addiction, because it's worth reiterating that it is not the case that every person who's living on the streets is suffering from mental illness or drug addiction.
Yeah, I think Lisa did a really good job spelling out that kind of juxtaposition where there are far fewer tents. And, you know, with the opening of the shelters and the city making efforts to like house people in parking lots and vehicle ordinances, people who really were just in need of a place to stay are largely off of the street. And so the people who are left behind are these people with really significant challenges.
I think that there is something happening as far as like the obviously the landscape isn't changing that much or ameliorating that much. However, it does seem like there's a collective acknowledgement among city and now county leaders that we have to just reckon with these folks need somewhere to sleep, and they are humans that need some sort of lifestyle ability to get a shower, to store their belongings, to sleep in cars if that's where they're at. And just today I was rather stunned to see Jen Campbell, the city councilwoman, recommend for one of these safe places to park overnight to be one of those nice parking lots right along the bay where SeaWorld is, right next to SeaWorld, off SeaWorld Drive there. I forgot, Shores Drive or whatever. That's that kind of thing I couldn't have pictured even just 6 months ago, it feels like.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, one of the impetuses of this story was when we talked about how the more recent crackdown, some of the sweeps that the city was embarking on during just before the homeless count. The police said, you guys need to be aware of just how bad things have gotten down there, and.
Okay.
It is.
We're aware.
Yeah, I'm proud of Lisa going out there, and thanks for helping to check that out. It's still bad, and we gotta still reckon with it. Okay, San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulconer and Hassan Akrada, the executive director of the San Diego Association of Governments, as we said, are both behind a plan to build the Grand Central San Diego Station. Is that what they're landing on?
Grand Central San Diego?
Just Grand Central San Diego.
San Diego Grand Central, I think.
I miss the Intermodal Transit Center.
Well, the Intermodal Transit Center
Always
is still an
forever in my
alternative
heart.
concept that's still floating around out there. To be clear.
So it is a separate concept.
Yes.
Okay.
When Jim Desmond requested like a study of Santa Fe Depot, was he like Intermodal Transit Center?
Did he have a place to hose off in it? And then
it's a deep cut. Just leave that
Depot
there.
joke.
Yeah.
If you get that, you are a super fan, and we'll see you on Wednesday at the Whistle Stop. So that Grand Central San Diego would handle trains, trolleys, buses, and they would connect them to airplanes at the airport. Some transit advocates are sort of hinting that hey guys, this is cool, but maybe there are cheaper ways to connect people to the airport, and there's not a lot of people that need to go to the airport, and some conservatives are saying, yeah, guys, that's cool, but how about our highways instead? But Akrada is intensely focused on that plan. There's just one problem. That land, of course, is still owned by the Navy, and it still houses Spay Wars. So you were at the Sandag retreat. So describe this for a second. Every year, Sandag and all the elected officials that are part of the board and other related folks go to Verona.
Yes, Lakeside, Verona.
And they go there to
Do they
meet.
each individually drive there?
I can never help but think about just how transit inaccessible the location of the retreat is.
More.
I think Colin Parent from La Mesa and Circulate took the bus out there a couple years ago to make a point. I don't know how long it took him to do that.
I can't even imagine that.
There are bus stations. I saw a bus station out there.
Okay, so they spent a couple days, right?
Yeah, they spent a couple days. I think a lot of people go back and forth, but
they
yes.
spend a couple days out there. Some probably hit the poker tables at night.
Yeah, I should have taken some video. They do team building exercises and stuff.
Trust falls?
Yes, they do trust falls and stuff. So in between sessions, you'll look out back and it's like, oh, there's Mary Salas falling into the arms of Jim Desmond. It's quite silly.
That's a joke.
No,
They're really doing that?
I don't know if they do. The thing I saw Jim
Is there
Desmond.
a ropes course?
Yeah,
okay.
There's hula hoops. There's
oh, good.
Step in. I don't know. It's.
All right,
Anyway,
so they
have a good time.
That's where they do. It's an official meeting, so you can go and watch. But it's also more leisurely as far as like panels and stuff like that. It's speakers. It's not this like Robert's Rules type stuff, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so did they make a decision on this plan or?
No, there's still the plan is to release the formal proposal in June, and they're building up to that. I think the biggest piece of news that came out of it was Sana Crata outlined what he believes is the non-negotiable aspect of this plan, which is every single person in San Diego County needs to be able to get from wherever they live to the airport by transit with only taking one transfer.
Wow.
So that is his standard. Whatever proposal they come up with has to make good on that one transfer vision, which if that happens, then whatever they've done will have fundamentally remade transit in this county. Because right now there aren't, the idea of getting from Lakeside, for instance, to the Middletown trolley station with only transferring one time. It's remarkable.
It's bananas.
It's not close.
The only place
you close to that.
The only place you could really do that right now is downtown on the Santa Fe Depot, taking the 997 or whatever to the airport.
Well, you could take any bus that intersects with the blue line.
Oh, one transfer,
because then the blue line
right.
would take you to Middletown trolley station.
Got it. So he is all in on Grand Central San Diego.
Yes, he is. And so, but it became clear that there are a number of dissenting opinions. For one, Jim Desmond said, look, we already have this really nice train station downtown, Santa Fe Depot. Let's at least conduct an analysis and see if it would be viable to do it down there instead of building this new thing. I think one of the big issues is that because they don't own the Spay War property, that's Navy property, you're going through a bidding process, and it's envisioned to be part of this large redevelopment concept where you would bring in development partners from the private sector and that sort of thing, that you just introduce a bunch of contingencies and uncertainty. You extend the timeline. You make it very expensive. It becomes difficult to be very certain of the date and time that you might have a viable airport transit connection if you're already banking on all of these things.
And at the same time, he keeps saying these very aspirational things about, for instance, that he envisions the coaster, which goes from downtown San Diego up to Oceanside, right?
Correct.
That would go every 10 minutes?
Yeah, it says 5 or 10 minutes. 10 is like the high end of his range.
10 is
that's
10 is the conservative goal.
What we're going to
What is it at now? Like an hour and a half?
An hour. During peak times, there might be a few times it runs every 45 minutes, but mostly it's an hour.
That would be something.
So his argument to Jim Desmond's proposal to consider Santa Fe was like, they don't have the capacity to ever handle the number of trains we would need to run at 5-minute intervals. So that's not going to work. Now, Colin Parent, who runs Circulate, he's a La Mesa city councilman, his point was the most important thing to do is to actually once and for all connect transit to the airport. So let's not get too caught up in what the perfect way to do that is. Right now, we have nothing. And so if we had a people mover to an existing transit station, that would be something, and that should be the priority.
Something is better than nothing.
Yeah.
We are joined here in the Voice of San Diego podcast studio. We're joined by Councilman Chris Cate. Welcome, Your Honor.
Thanks for having me.
How are you?
Doing great.
We've got a lot of things to talk to you about.
Uh-oh.
All right, so let's start with the news of the week that we were following. You put out a memo with Vivian Moreno the other day saying, hey, I know we've almost finished this legislative agenda for the city, but we hadn't heard about this bill that Ben Hueso, state senator, and our own city attorney, Mara Elliott, had put together to sort of defang the State Public Records Act. And you guys said, we're a little uncomfortable with that. We'd like that included in this discussion and maybe oppose it. And then that happened.
Yeah, and thanks to The Voice primarily for raising this issue. I mean, this is something that, as was stated at the council meeting, nobody knew about. We were not briefed, told, informed about this whatsoever. And so without you all and what you guys do, we would have had no idea this was happening. But at least in my viewpoints, after reading the bill and hearing about it and actually reading the language, it is very bad, bad. And coming from, you would think, attorneys and ledge counsel and whatnot, a lot of things were left up in the air and questions, and just I can see more litigation about that. And it was just not a good thing. And so after talking to some folks and working with Councilmember Moreno's office, we were all on the same page that we needed to do something, and it was opportune time because the legislative platform that we adopt and give to our advocates and lobbyists in Sacramento and DC was coming up. And we thought that was an appropriate time to at least lay our position out there and be on the record about it. And my colleagues raised a number of great points, whether it was Councilmember Montgomery talking about the new what would you say? The new benchmark that you'd have to prove. Those were all excellent points, and just very pleased with our colleagues coming on board and really setting a statement.
Yeah. So, well, when you've been on the city council now 5 years.
5 years.
So, have you seen the city attorney go after a bill legislation sort of separately from you guys before?
I don't. Not that I recall, and I could be wrong. I'm not sure what Jen Goldsmith did. Either we only overlapped for 2 years, and before that, but I don't recall ever seeing that. Typically, that's something that we again adopt, and I think we've done a really good job of really outlining certain parameters about what we want to advocate for, and not really have it come off on a bill by bill basis, because that can get very ugly and just bog down our docket and really not get anything done. So here are a number of different priority areas. Here you go, lobbyists, you go do what you do best, because things come up the last minute, whether it's spot bills in Sacramento or things changed in DC on any given notice. They want to be prepared, and that's why we adopt this platform. And it was really, again, I think unusual to have a city attorney advocating for a bill like that, and again, not telling anybody about it.
She's certainly been involved in supporting or opposing Sacramento
Absolutely.
legislation, but I don't know that I've seen her sponsor a bill that I can remember. And, in my interactions with Ben Hueso's office, they made it very clear that this was her bill, and she was the one to answer any questions.
Yeah, from the very beginning, the moment you called them, they're like, "Oh, this is the city attorney."
Yeah, you can get all that from their office.
Yeah, she's advocated for, and her office advocated for grant funding for like the SMART program and things like that, which is totally
she's
cool.
Spoken out about the detention of immigrants at courthouses and things like that. But those are all other people's legislation that she's simply saying I support it or don't.
Right.
So bunch of council members made a point, sort of apart from the bill, to talk about the process of it and say, like, we understand you have the authority as an elected official to sponsor legislation if you wish, but we'd really prefer a system where we're all on the same page and we talk to each other. What is it about that you think is important? Why? I mean, as long as the city attorney is an independent elected official, what is it that you think is significant about having the city council and the city attorney and the mayor's office on the same page that way?
I think Councilmember Kersey made an excellent point during that discussion, saying that, well, if the city attorney is up there advocating for something, you would assume that the entire city is behind that, and that may not be the case. Mm-hmm. And so how do you make that distinction between, if the city attorney wants something and she is adamantly against the council on this, she's elected, she can do that. Okay, but you better be clear, and we better be right behind her saying that, no, just so Senator or Assembly Member X, Y, or Z, this is not a bill that we support, even though our city attorney is. So that's where there could be some challenges in that regard. And that's where, okay, if you want to include something in the legislative platform, you sit at our council committee meetings, let us know. Let us know. We would like to see some of these priorities included in the ledge platform that our office would be helpful in advocating for. And they're involved in the League of California Cities, and there's an avenue for them to do that type of advocacy work. Just let us know.
Mm-hmm. So Corey Briggs, during his public comments, speaking in opposition to 615, he kind of pulled in your experience with the city attorney's office. So, bit of a refresher for anybody who doesn't remember. There was a city attorney memo, legal opinion about about the Soccer City and SDSU West proposals. You acknowledged later that you had been the person who gave that memo to the lawyers for Soccer City. Mara Elliott was very upset about that. She pushed for prosecution. She went to the media and talked about what a betrayal it was and what a problem it was. When Corey Briggs decided to sort of connect these two issues,
recall that had come up because of Briggs's own suit too, right?
Right.
So he
do you
was
remember the details of that?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
It's just through discovery, he had kind of forced that discussion out, right? So he seemed to know the issue from that perspective.
Yeah, but so specifically his decision to connect the sponsoring of this legislation and the memo issue. Do you see a connection between those two things?
Yeah, when I was trying to follow, and I still haven't gone back and listened to Mr. Briggs and his testimony. I was trying to follow it. It kind of got a little bit jumbled. There were some things where I'm not privy to that I wouldn't know that best, and I guess he's had conversations with the city attorney about some of these things, so I wouldn't know all the details. You know, I'm trying not to be a, I guess I don't want to say conspiracy theorist because that's probably a bad term to use on this because I don't think it's a far-flung conspiracy potentially, but I just don't know the details on it. So it's hard to really to do that. And frankly, that's behind me. You know, it's over, it's done. I'm looking at it separately. I'm not trying to combine the two and look at that. You know, so I'm not trying to conflate both issues. I'll leave that to, you know, if Corey wants to go down that road, he can conflate it and he can talk to Mara about it and they can hash it out.
Yeah.
The voicemail was interesting though. I had the first I've heard of that.
So for background, he played a voicemail where the city attorney was saying to rest assured that this document that you got in trouble for leaking was going to come out, that she was going to make it not confidential anymore. I guess the implication being like that she wasn't as concerned as she later relayed that it be confidential. But let's just one more question on this issue in particular. What made it unanimous, do you think? Was the city council just all is that something we can really rely on as a bipartisan sort of fundamental of this city council, that transparency is important?
I think so. I think if you look at the last 5-6 years, especially since Mayor Faulconer's been in office, we've done a lot to be that way, whether it's our open data policy, putting data online, next request, filing of PRAs, and you know, we deal with them too. Our offices deal with public records act requests, and we respond to them. You know, a lot of members, myself included, we put our calendars online. You know, put the data up there. You know, put the information up there. Yeah, things could happen, and you know, puzzles may be put together or whatever else. But you know, we're open about this, and I think the council has been pretty adamant about wanting to show that and show leadership in that regard. And so I think you saw unanimous because we all hold this issue dearly, and some of us have been on the other end filing those public records act requests. We filed a ton of PRAs when I was at the Taxpayers Association. You know, Council President Pro Tem Breed mentioned in her journalism days. You look at Georgette Gomez. I mean, she was at EHC. I mean, I'm sure she's filed a PRA or two in her past as well too. And we all have history with this, and we hold it pretty close to our hearts.
Let's talk about something else that's been in the news lately. The city council wrestled with this idea of authorizing the mayor to hire a contractor to help negotiate with San Diego State the purchase of the Mission Valley Stadium land. And there was a really interesting committee hearing at the Budget Committee last week that you were involved in, trying to decide whether to authorize this. The city council, the committee decided not to, but you were kind of flabbergasted, it felt like, about like how that was going. What is it that you know, what are you thinking about as you go into these negotiations with state? Your colleague Barbara Bry, Councilwoman Barbara Bry, said that she felt like key deal points of the sale of the land are already done. The price, the whole deal, all we have to do is get some paperwork done. Is that the way you feel about how it's going?
Not at all. And if you look at who's on the other side of the table from SDSU, they have attorneys and real estate experts who are going to be at the negotiation table against us. And I love our city staff, but Chris Michelle, our chief operating officer, our head of our real estate assets department, head of our planning, I would say that they have some expertise in this, but they also do other things. They're running a city and involved in a million other things. Their attention isn't dedicated strictly to this, whereas the people who are on this side of the table, this is all they're going to be doing. They got hired to do this specifically. Why wouldn't we have experts on our side to negotiate a fair deal, both on SDSU and the taxpayers? And there aren't deal points that are set. If you read the initiative, it's not only we have to determine what fair market value is, but you would also include deductions and discounts and renovation costs. All these things can be taken off the top of whatever the appraisal of fair market value essentially is, and we determine what that value is. So I sat there saying, well, if the deal points are set, then, and if anybody believes this is not a complicated matter, then we would take whatever the last appraised value is, give that to SDSU, and they'd pay that. And you would not support any other deductions whatsoever. I doubt that that's going to be the case, because I'm pretty sure that SDSU is going to ask for those deductions. I want the experts on our side saying, okay, why did they ask for that? How did they get to that number? And do we have an alternative number in mind to counter on that?
Do you think that, for instance, the giant river park that was promised, do you think that's a deduction from the fair market value? Because that seems like a key deal point. Like, they either build the park and then pay fair market value on the side, or they pay fair market value and then they deduct the park from that. That seems like a $20-30 million question.
That's a great question, and I don't know the answer to that. Okay, I don't know what they're going to ask for or what we're going to say. I mean, even down the point of, are they going to pay cash now? Mm-hmm. Are they going to make payments over a period of time? What are the terms of that? What are we charging in interest? I mean, those are deal points that are not negotiated by any stretch of the imagination, that are really key, again, to making sure we have a fair deal. I'm not saying that we should play hardball on SDSU and say it takes all or nothing, but there's got to be some type of negotiation discussion. I want experts on our side who are going to be doing that.
Yeah. So I think, and Councilwoman Bry has made this point a couple times in emails to supporters, and I think in her announcement about why she opposed this contract, that the city and SDSU should not be in an adversarial position when they iron out this deal. And I think there's a certain logic to that.
Absolutely, and I agree with that.
Yeah, that they're both representatives of the public, and negotiating against each other is kind of a zero-sum game with the public in the middle. So you agree with that?
Absolutely, and that's where I say I don't want even necessarily the best deal on behalf of taxpayers. I want a fair deal, because I do want something to happen at that stadium site. And as the voters approve SDSU, it's our job to implement the will of the voters. But I also don't want to be taken to the woodshed. I mean, the city doesn't have the best history in negotiating deals. And so I also, on behalf of my taxpayers and the districts I represent, I'm here to service on their behalf as well. So there's a balance to that. And that's where I think if SDSU is going to be asking for a lot of things, I'm not a real estate expert. I'm going to have some questions on this and how we get there. Again, I just want the best people at the table negotiating. I don't think that's anything that SDSU would be opposed to, or anybody from the city should be opposed to. They're doing the same thing. They're having the best experts on their side as well. And we should have it on our side.
Just one other question on this. There seems to be maybe an underlying disagreement about whether the mayor is really the one who gets to sort of negotiate the deal to present to the city council. Am I reading that right, or do you think that dispute exists?
I think I don't think the dispute exists. Maybe, and some council members may disagree with that, but I think it was put pretty clearly to us by the city attorney's office that the mayor is the lead negotiator on this, and our role is not to negotiate, which I'm perfectly fine with. I think the issue that I took onus with at that committee meeting was it was presented that even our independent budget analyst, Andrea Tevin, has been briefed by the city attorney's office on this negotiation, where we haven't. I mean, I have not received the briefing. We have not received a closed session briefing. I guess Council President Gomez released a statement or memorandum earlier this week saying that she's going to docket this for open discussion, which is great. That's, I think, at least for me, all I'm asking for is I want to be briefed on this. Where are we at? What's the timing? What are we doing? What studies have we done? What have they asked for? I'm perfectly okay not telling the mayor what to do, and he may ask for our input, and we're all happy to provide that to him. I just would like to know where we're at That way, when it comes to council, at least I've had some history on this and not just presented with 5,000 pages of documents and studies, a week before our council meeting to make a decision of this magnitude.
Got it. Well, I wanted to ask you, so we've had periodic conversations about the future of the Republican Party. You are now one of the few elected members in the city about that.
The few, the proud.
Yeah, right. So there was a new California chairwoman elected, Jessica Patterson, and she seems to have a lot of support and seems to be on that side of maybe figuring out ways to allow California Republicans to distance themselves appropriately from the president or have their own separate brand. Is that the way you understand it, or how do you look at the party? And we talked to Brian Jones in Sacramento, and he's like, "Well, it's basically like a plane crashing, and we're gonna fly out of it." But
yeah, he said he's gonna stay on the plane.
Yeah. So what do you think these days?
Yeah, he said that.
He did.
He crafted the metaphor in which there was a plane crash, and he said, "I'll stay in the plane."
So it was something about how pilots have a saying, and it's like you don't bail out until
you fly towards the crash.
You
and
fly
then
towards the crash.
Try to gain altitude.
Yeah, and he's like, I'm sticking on the plane.
Party, how does that come together?
Well, there's an adage in flying. I'm not a pilot, but I've heard the adage: when the plane is failing and crashing, you fly to the crash site, meaning you don't give up flying until impact.
Right.
And so I'm committed to the Republican Party, and I don't think we're going to crash and burn. I certainly hope we don't. And I don't think a third party is an option. And so I'm in the leadership. We're going to fly this thing until we straighten it out and start gaining altitude again.
How do you feel about that metaphor, Chris?
I'm not a pilot, so I don't know how that works, but I'm excited. I'm really excited about Jessica. I've had very minimal interactions with her on a personal level, but I have a lot of close friends who have worked with her in the past, who know her well. I'm just excited that the party is getting a different viewpoint. You have a young female Latina who's now leading the party, who has a different perspective, but still has history in regards to the party, knows the operations, knows how campaigns work, and can be supportive of us as local parties in our efforts during election cycles. I think you're starting to see candidates on the right who are more representative of not only the districts that they're running for, but just California in general. You look at myself, Filipino, representative Filipino district, API district. You look at some other candidates like Ling Ling Cheng or Young Kim, or even like Noli Zosa now, who's Filipino in the 7th district. You're starting to see that, which I think is exciting, and different perspectives on where we're at as a city and as a region, as a state now.
Mm-hmm.
So one member of the state assembly, Chad Mays, who's like a very outspoken centrist Republican, had said that if Travis Jones, who was also
Travis Allen,
was also in the running for chair of the party, was elected, he thought that there would be more defections along the lines of Brian Mainshine. And Will Rodriguez Kennedy, the new chair of the local Democratic Party, has also said he thinks that there will be more defections. Is that something that is on your radar, or do you think that there are people who, do distance themselves from the president who are kind of wavering at this point?
Not in my conversations. I think the mayor, he spoke at New Way, was it this last week or the week before? Yeah. I think made some good points. I think if you looked at an interview that Catherine Baker had right after the election, she stated the kind of the same points, and she is who she is, and she's a Republican, and she's gonna continue to be a Republican. And I think those are good, honest fights and debates to have within the party. We're not monolithic in terms of our viewpoints. I'm a Republican. I'm not going to change. I'm going to differ on policy positions than my fellow Republicans here in San Diego, but I'm going to be a Republican fighting for the cause and the issues that I believe in. And I don't think that, for me personally, that I can really spend a lot of energy worrying about if someone else is going to switch parties or not. I'll leave that to them. That's their decisions to make. They have their own reasons why they're doing that. all I can say is I think that based on the election of Jessica, what's happening with candidates now, I think it shows that we are actually a big tent, and we have to prove that to people and showcase that to people. And if you have ideas, fight for them and bring them up for consideration.
You mentioned Noli Zosa in the 7th. So he's a candidate in the city council 7th district. So that's Scott Sherman's seat. He's leaving that seat in a year or 2.5 or whatever. And so
can consult the countdown on his desk.
Yeah, that's right. He's literally counting down the days.
You can't miss it. That's for sure.
The only issue with that is that I think that countdown started 6 years ago.
Yeah. So, are there other? He's interesting. Are there other local candidates that you're specifically excited about?
Yeah, I think if you look at even June Cutter, who's running against Brian Mainshine. I mean, she's Korean American, mother, businesswoman. Again, I think you're starting to see candidates have a voice and want to speak up and become engaged that are representative of their district. That's an API district. I live in the 77th. That's an API seat, in my opinion. And so I think you're starting to see that. I think what we can always do better at as a party is candidate recruitment and identifying who these people are, potential candidates from the communities that they represent. And it's easy to get kind of a top-down approach where you're saying, oh, we want so-and-so to run for this seat or that seat. But what are we doing to recruit candidates who can start from the ground up, whether it's at their local PTAs or their school clusters or whatever else? Who are those leaders that you see naturally rising to the top? And we can have a discussion with them and hopefully get them to run for these seats.
I wondered if you see any major policy changes, if the party seems willing to step away from any sort of policy orthodoxies based on the way things have transitioned over the last few years. I mean, I'm thinking the sort of thing like 2012, Republicans support very strongly Prop A, this sort of pseudo ban on project labor agreements. As you lose elections and power, therefore, do you start to consider saying, well, maybe we can let some project labor agreements go if it means that we get some projects that are priorities to us done?
I don't think the party as an organization will necessarily get involved in those discussions. I think Tony Kravarik has done a very good job of not allowing the party to become engaged on policy and more worried about winning elections and candidate races. So take that aside for a second. Yeah. If you look at, I think, Republican elected officials and the policies that they're pushing for, again, I think you have to look at issues that are going to resonate across the aisle. I think there are issues. Government mandated PLAs. Me personally, I'm opposed to them. You probably will see some people move off from a case by case basis. That's just, again, me philosophically. But overall, there are some pretty major issues that I think we can get behind. Housing, homelessness. I mean, those are issues that I think as Republicans we can present ideas on there to try to address those issues. And we've dabbled and played in those issues, and we're going to continue to be engaged in some of those issues in the near future about issues related to childcare, issues related to sex trafficking, issues related to public safety. So I think those are issues that will cross party lines that we as Republican elected officials may have not dabbled in the past, but need to start thinking about in the future, because these are issues that are present and are problems with the communities that we represent.
Well, Councilman Chris Cate, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
All right, next up is the People's Reporter. This week, the team got an audience question about what happens to fees paid by developers who choose not to build affordable housing. Here you go.
Welcome to the People's Reporter, a Voice of San Diego feature that answers your questions. I'm Lisa Halverstad.
And I'm Adriana Heldes. Recently, we got a question from Michael Castro. He asked, developers who want to build multifamily housing pay a fee to not provide affordable housing. Does that money actually go into building affordable housing? So I have a feeling that Lisa knows something about this.
I sure do. I spent lots of time digging into this very question last year. More than a decade ago, the city started giving developers an option. They could set aside some units in their project for low-income renters or pay a fee. Now, this fee was supposed to end up in the city's affordable housing fund. With that bucket of money, the city is supposed to help meet housing needs for low-income folks.
So just to make sure I get it, who is paying the fee?
Developers who build homes in San Diego who decide not to build a certain amount of affordable housing.
And how much do they have to set aside?
At least 10% if they agree to do that.
Okay, so if a developer is building a place in San Diego and doesn't want to set homes aside for folks below a certain income, they can just pay a fee and they're done with it. And the money goes to the city.
Basically, for now, yes.
But to get to Michael's question, does that money eventually go to build more affordable homes?
Yes, with a pretty big caveat. This money has helped fund more than 2,000 affordable housing units. And when I checked on this last year, another 775 were in the works. But the money is being spent on other things too.
So if you owe the fee, you pay the fee. The fees bill what you didn't or not? What's the disconnect?
When I was looking into all this, I found out that nearly a quarter of the funds were going to other places, not directly to affordable units, which sure surprised some advocates who worked on this policy years ago. The assumption was that all the money would go to housing.
Where were the funds going?
To related but different things, like programs to help first-time home buyers in San Diego, programs for homelessness, and this money has also covered administrative costs at the San Diego Housing Commission.
And is that allowed?
Technically, yeah.
Okay.
The city ordinance that allowed all this said city officials should prioritize housing projects, but it also gives the commission discretion to spend this money on other things if the city council signs off. And so far, almost a quarter of that money has gone somewhere else.
Wow. So a good percentage of the money is going to projects Michael asked about, but it's far from all the money.
Right. And I think it's worth noting there's a lot of interest in changing this equation and this policy altogether. City Council President Georgette Gomez wants to update this policy to encourage more affordable housing development. She's hoping to propose an updated policy sometime this year.
So there you go, Michael. Some, but not all, of the money from the affordable housing fees actually funds affordable housing. But changes could be coming this year.
Thanks for the question, Michael. We're always happy to get more. So if you're wondering about something, ask us. You can do that at VOSD.org/ask.
We have some questions and answers there already. Check those out and give us yours.
Thanks for listening to the Voice of San Diego podcast. Don't forget that our live show is next week. Get tickets at voiceofsandiego.org/events. There's a link to the event in the show notes as well. Also in the notes, you'll find our podcast survey. We've gotten a few really helpful bits of feedback so far, especially the ones that say they like me. So please keep it coming, and thank you. Again, find that in the show notes. I'm Scott Lewis, CEO and Editor-in-Chief of Voice. Andy Keats is the Assistant Editor. Sarah Libby is Managing Editor. And this show is produced by Nate John and Adriana Heldis and Megan Wood. Talk to you next week.